I recently had the opportunity to connect with a number of the house church leaders from within our Capstone and Humbervale church family. And as I asked these leaders to reflect and share a little bit about how they and their families, as well as their house churches as a whole, have been faring over the past few months, there were a couple of common themes and descriptions that emerged. Many of us reflected on just being tired, on the way in which it can be easy to grow weary in the midst of the ongoing life in pandemic reality that we're living through. And truly, as we find ourselves in the middle of now a third wave here in our area, and as we find ourselves in the middle of yet another shutdown, another lockdown, it can be easy to grow discouraged. And as I was reflecting on that propensity, on our need for ongoing endurance, and on the ease with which we can slip into a place of discouragement and even despair, I was reminded of what Jesus says in Luke chapter 18. At the beginning of this chapter, Jesus tells this striking parable about a persistent widow. Let me read it for you in Luke chapter 18, beginning in verse 2. He said, "In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, 'Give me justice against my adversary.' For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, 'Though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming.' And the Lord said, 'Hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'" I've always been so compelled by this parable of the persistent widow. This woman who finds herself in a disenfranchised, marginalized place where she's being denied the justice that she rightly deserves, and the very people who are supposed to be upholding and defending her cause, like this judge, are the very people that are standing in the way of her receiving the justice that she deserves. And yet Jesus says that despite the discouraging and disheartening circumstances that she finds herself in, she nevertheless continues to go to this judge and ask for the justice that she deserves. And eventually, this unrighteous judge, who neither fears God nor respects man, he caves. He gives in to the cries of the persistent widow. Now, of course, Jesus tells this parable to encourage his disciples to believe that God is not like this unrighteous judge. How much more will a Father who is a God of justice and of love respond to the prayers and to the cries of his people who cry to him day and night? Now, there are so many things that can be said about this parable beyond what we have time for in this short video. But for now, I want to draw your attention to the way that Luke introduces this parable in this chapter of his gospel. In Luke 18, verse 1, before describing the parable that Jesus shares, he says the following: "And he told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart." I've always thought that was such a beautiful phrase, that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. I think what this suggests to us is that Jesus is well aware that the circumstances that we encounter in life, the kind of trials and hardships and sorrows that he said we can expect, especially if we're going to follow him, are the kinds of things that would easily cause us to lose heart. And yet his desire for his disciples, for his followers, is that they would be a people who do not lose heart. And isn't it interesting that in this particular passage and in this parable, he connects not losing heart to continuing in prayer. Luke says that he tells this parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not to lose heart. If you think back with me to the beginning of this calendar year, in many ways our church year began with this excited, impassioned call to prayer, this renewal of prayer. And you might even remember that we took up something that we called the 20-minute prayer challenge in the month of February, where we were encouraging one another to come together for set periods of time throughout our day and to pray for ourselves, for our families, for our church, for our community as a whole. I remember hearing from many of us over the course of that month who described how encouraged they felt, how meaningful that time of prayer, that regular habit and practice of turning to God in prayer, how it was shaping them, how it was encouraging them, how it was even something that they wanted to continue after February. Now, I don't know about you, but prayer is often in my life kind of like that loose screw on the the kitchen chair. You tighten it, but then after a few months, after sitting in it for a while, that screw just seems to become loose again. And so it's something you have to go back to once more and retighten. I often find the same thing to be true about prayer in my own life. That I can go through a season like we did as a church community early on in our year, where there was such a passion and zeal and excitement about prayer, and where it was something that we were really intentionally pursuing. And yet so often I can find myself drifting from that place. And what I've come to notice is that the experiences of my life in which I am prone to losing heart are often the same experiences in which my own practice of prayer has grown tired or cold. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that there's a direct correlation between those two things. However, what I am saying is that Jesus commends us in this parable to be a people who do not lose heart. And what he tells us will help us to be that kind of people is that we are a people who continue in prayer, who always pray. And so today I want to leave you with that encouragement and with that point of reflection. If you find yourself in a place today where you are tending to lose heart, where you sense that the tug and the propensity towards discouragement, towards anxiety, towards feelings of despair or sorrow, can I encourage you? Jesus wants us to always pray. What might it look like for you to take all of those feelings, all of that propensity to lose heart, and to pour it out before the Lord afresh and anew today? What would it look like for each of us to encourage one another towards an ongoing pattern of prayer, believing that the God to whom we are praying is not like the unrighteous judge, who neither fears God nor respects man, but who is a just, a gracious, a loving heavenly Father, who longs to receive the prayers, the cries of his people, and to respond and to strengthen them. Again, Jesus closes this parable by asking the question, nevertheless, will the Son of Man find faith when he comes? In other words, to believe all of this, to believe that God really is a righteous and loving Father who hears our prayer, and that when all the circumstances around us in life tell us that we should lose heart, to instead believe that we can pour out our needs, our requests, our cries to God in prayer, believing that he hears us and that he is at work. To do that requires faith. And so maybe today you can join me in praying that the Lord would increase our faith in who he is, in his willingness to meet us in our hour of need, to strengthen our hearts that grow weak and tired and weary, and to give us fresh faith to continue praying and to continue believing that he is with us and that he's at work in and through us, even in this time.